I am so pleased to see all of you back to visit because you remember it is our community and it's such fun to meet our neighbors. Today we have a most interesting woman. Her name is Dr. Frances Connelly. She is professor of art history at the University of Missouri at Kansas City. And I am delighted, Frances, to have you.
Thank you so much.
She wrote a book and she's going to talk about it. And the name of the book is The Grotesque in Western Art and Culture. You know, that's an interesting title. And William Faulkner said something that I think was kind of interesting, and he said, it's the aim of every artist to arrest motion, which is life, by artificial means, and to hold it fixed so that 100 years later, when a stranger looks at it, it moves again, since it is life. And I think that's it reminded me of the grotesque in Western art and culture, because the term grotesque is usually kind of abhorrent and something that we don't want to look at.
Right.
But that's the title of your book. So talk about the word grotesque, if you would be
Right.
so kind.
Right. Well, actually, it's one of the reasons I got interested in this. For my master's degree, worked in Renaissance, Italian Renaissance, and the grotesque at that time, that's when the word grotesque emerged, around 1500. They discovered all these Roman decorations underground, and they were wildly inventive and so on, and they were of the grotto, and they called it grotesque, and it meant improvisational, fantastical, surprising. Michelangelo and Raphael imitate these, and I thought, well, it meant that 1500. Nowadays, we use it to refer to something
kind of ugh.
disgusting.
And,
you know, so it's a real conversation
Yeah.
starter. Usually when someone says, what do you work on? And I say, well, I
The
work on
grotesque.
the grotesque. And I get this look like, well, you look like such a nice person. Why would you?
Well, they expect you to be creepy, Frances.
Yes, yes. But I was interested in how did it change? What's the evolution of this, or the ways that it's played through in Western culture? And there are actually many, many ways. But in modern art, from say 1750 on, it's such a dominant element of modern art, and yet when I looked, there was just nothing written on it. So that's that was really exciting.
Well, you know, when you
too.
told me that, I thought, isn't that odd? Because the art that we're talking about as grotesque encompasses several centuries and many very, very famous artists.
That's right.
So I thought it was sort of odd that nobody had really picked that up. As you sent a picture of I don't know if it's a cave or a what, but it looks like a man's face.
Right.
And it has a wonderful quote by Leonardo da Vinci, and he says, after having remained in the entry of this grotto some time, two contrary emotions arose in me, fear and desire. That's kind of interesting, don't you think so? Fear of the threatening, dark ghetto, and desire to see whether there were any marvelous things within it.
That's right.
Fear of the dark and
desire
the desire
to go and see what it is. And that is what I think, well, back to the thing, why nothing on the grotesque? I think because it doesn't fall into standard art historical categories. It's not a style, it's not a particular subject, but it's an image that fuses contraries together. So what Leonardo is describing, I want to see it, I'm afraid of what it can be. That's exactly that kind of fusion of contradictions, or taking away the line between things that are extremely different from one another. The particular grotto that's being shown there, that was a fantasy garden, a Renaissance garden, and that was built in the later 1500s, and they just loved grottos full of all kinds of strange
Well, I'm going to
things.
quote you,
All
and
right.
you said, how it looks is not as important as how it operates,
Right.
and it can serve, it being the grotesque, can serve to reveal profound meanings.
Yes, yes.
So why did you say that, President?
Why did I say that? Well, because there are a number of, well, again, most people think the grotesque is just something that's there to make you recoil in horror. But again, that's a more modern take on it. The grotesque, as I mentioned, tends to bring things together that they don't completely fit together. So it's for the viewer to step in and figure out, you know, what are the connections? Why is this the way that it is? For example, there's on the cover the image by Bruegel, which shows a fish, you know, with other fish spilling out.
And we're going to show them
It's
that
a
in
really
minute. Yeah.
bizarre image. So, you know, the grotesque invites curiosity and engagement, and it doesn't
And
just
you think maybe I'll just take another little step into that grotto.
right. That's right. It invites
Yeah.
the viewer, and well, in fact, the 19th century writer John Ruskin talked about the grotesque as something that brought contrary things together, and it made the viewer leap the gap. The viewer has to figure out what's going on. Is this really something I find horrible, or is it delightful, or is it something in between all these things? So it balances things and doesn't resolve them for you.
Well, in the early Greeks, Horace defined the grotesque as a monstrous woman out of control and breaching the boundaries of identity and propriety. Now that's tough stuff there.
Yes, it is.
That is.
That's right. That's the earliest discussion of the grotesque. And it's interesting that it's a woman that's, well, it's kind of a mermaid kind of figure, the way he describes it. But one of the kinds of images you see a lot in the grotesque tradition is a woman out of control. You know, a woman who has the power. The Medusa image by Rubens is, she's a classic example where she is a woman who is extremely powerful, therefore dangerous. And instead of beautiful flowing hair, she has snaky hair.
Sometimes I feel like mine looks like that too.
Right. And in the image, even when her head is cut off, every drop of blood spawns more snakes. So, yeah.
Well, and the other I think that we need to talk about as we talk about the grotesque is symbolism, because the symbols in the grotesque were very important because a lot of early people couldn't read.
Right.
So the symbolism is not meant to be so much grotesque as a teaching tool. Yes?
It depends on the image for sure.
Well, that's right. And we're going to, you know, the symbolism, we have some that show symbolism, and I think that as this Hieronymus Bosch is one that I like Hieronymus Bosch.
Right.
And you look at that and you think, well, this poor man needs to be committed. But indeed, we have ears with, talk about some of the symbols that he used.
Right. Well, this is from the third panel. It shows figures in suffering the torments of hell. It's part of a panel called the Garden of Earthly Delights. So again, that's already kind of grotesque because it sounds like this really nice place to be. But basically, by the time you get to this panel, you have this combined figure. I mean, the grotesque, one thing I wanted to say visually about it is grotesque, or the grotesque, typically is a figure in that's not resolved. It's combined things, like here there's a broken egg. There are kind of the
What
the
are
ears
these
with
things that look like, I don't know.
Well, there are things out of his prodigious imagination. You have ears with a knife, which shows the torments. All the sensual pleasures, sensory pleasures are being punished. But in front is this Eggman. The broken egg was a symbol of foolishness, so there's a symbol. Foolishness. It has a face, which is thought to be a self-portrait. He wears some kind of strange hat, and then there are all these weird shifts of scale. So there's a penguin kind of figure parading around. There's a big bagpipe form, and it's blaring out music on the top of this head of a nun. The Eggman is perched on top of what's the word? Driftwood-like legs, and they sit in boats. So it's for one thing a symbolism of things that are completely unstable.
Well, don't you think life is sort of confusing sometimes? I mean, I think it kind of illustrates the confusion that a lot of people feel, and the kind of the feeling, I'm not sure what we're talking about here.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what he's building on is several centuries of medieval imagery that had a lot of very inventive monsters and devils, showing the tortures that one would suffer if you didn't live an upright life. So
Keeping the troops in line was
keeping the troops in line, and of course, typical human nature, often the torments of hell section of these medieval carvings were the most interesting part, because it let the artists imagine that angels and saints, you know, there are very strict rules about how they can be shown, but monsters, all kinds of possibilities. So Bosch is really the next move. He's a Renaissance artist, and there's a lot of his own personal invention in these works. And certain images that show up early in that panel are repeated in different ways in this final one. But he was a hugely influential artist because of this invention. And people could certainly understand the message in this, but they also admired his improvisation. So, and his work was described as grotesque because of that.
But his work was, you know, a lot of this work was, in these eras, was in churches. This was not.
No, it never would have been in a church. It's too personal.
And you have brought some other interesting, the one that you used on the front of your, here's a good one.
Peter Bruegel. Oh, I'm sorry, the Schongauer, yes.
That's kind of a mixed up mess.
That's right. This is actually a favorite subject. Artists who work in the grotesque, it's the temptation of St. Anthony. And St. Anthony was tempted by all kinds of devils and beautiful women and so on. And so again, it's an opportunity to show lots of invented monstrous forms.
Had I lived in this era and seen this, would I have understood what he was trying to say?
Yes, I think so. Because, well, there weren't that many images around, for one thing, and most of them tended to be within the, in Western Europe, in the Christian tradition. So you would see this saintly figure, and he has the attributes of St. Anthony, and then he's being literally bedeviled on everywhere, torn at by these different creatures. But again, like Bosch, this is the same era, Bosch and Schongauer, the artist is inventing even more new and inventive monsters. So it's kind of, again.
Do you think art of the grotesque reached its zenith during the Renaissance?
Well, it sort of lays out its territory in the Renaissance. All the major sort of strands of the grotesque and the word and the use of the grotesque as sort of an aesthetic category, as a way of thinking about images, that's set out in the Renaissance, but then it's reinvented. 18th century, a lot of new things like caricature as a major public art form. In the modern 20th century,
I want to go back just a little bit more to the symbolism, though. You use a wonderful symbol on the front of your book, and it's a large fish. I don't know what you want to say, regurgitating other fish.
Right.
Talk about that just a little bit.
Right. Well, this image is just fascinating me. It's by Peter Bruegel the Elder.
And we think of them as these cute little people running around on farms.
Right, that's right. That's what he's best known for.
Not because of the symbolism.
That's right. But this one is the big fish eat the little fish, and that is basically based on a proverb, which we still use today. Big fish eat the little fish. The powerful get more powerful. The weak get weaker, that kind of thing. And so you have this gigantic beached fish. And a man cuts it open, and out of its belly falls more fish. And these medium-sized fish, if you look closely, many of them are eating still smaller fish. It's typical of the grotesque in that things are living and dying at the same time.
Well, in the food chain.
They're eating. Yes, you get the food chain. Out of the front of the mouth of the fish, all these other ones spill out, and yet every fish has more fish coming out of it. And so in the foreground, you have a father, his son, and he points and says, "Ecce," there's written right above it, like, here, this is the way of the world. Basically, this is how things are, son. And but in the book, if you look in the background, I mean, these prints are just packed with information. In the background, there is a rock and a boat on top of it, which seems kind of improbable. And so I started thinking about that. And this word, ECCE, which typically in medieval and Renaissance art you see over the crucifixion, like behold the man. So I thought, well, could you read that in a contradictory opposite way, because grotesque are usually images that can work more than one way and want you to see it as there's a flip side. So I thought, well, it can also be something where you are thinking about the sacrifice of the greater for the lesser. The fish dies, all these other fish live. And the salvation imagery, Noah also is a salvation image of someone that was spared through the grace of God. So there, so
it
it's
is
an
a
interesting
series
image.
of stories and lessons.
Right.
I really think you know, even fine artists like Rubens
Yes.
used symbolism
Yes.
in painting. So we think of Rubens as those wonderful, wonderful, beautiful,
Women.
voluptuous women
Very voluptuous.
with the red hair, you know.
Right.
But not so always.
No. And this this painting, actually, he had a natural history painter do all the reptiles for him.
He didn't do them.
He didn't do those. He did the
Oh.
head of Medusa, but there was a specialist. Rubens was very free about having people in his workshop. But Franz Snyder's is the name of the man who came in and did all the different kinds of creepy crawlies. And again, it's a really goosebump-inducing image of the person who owned it. There's a record of the person who first owned this had it in his home behind a curtain. So you can just imagine that he would pull that curtain back and say, look at this. And so the visual shock is even
Well, it's
even
true.
more.
It's not something you would really want to see with your breakfast every morning.
No.
Painting is not the only way this has happened. Sometimes it's done in, you brought a silver, piece of silver,
Yes.
and it has a snake on it.
Yes.
And so all of this was, these figural things were talked about in different media.
That's right. And again, it has that surprise element that you often see in the grotesque. This is a silver
Chalice of some sort?
chalice.
Yeah.
Yes, it would be. That's actually at the Nelson Atkins Museum, and it's 18th century. And when you approach it, you just see this beautiful sort of outline.
And then, whoa.
But as you reach to touch it,
You grab a
know,
snake.
you realize, yes,
That's
that
right.
the handles are snakes that are weaving and are plunging in and out of this. So it's a really great grotesque because it draws you in, the beautiful silver, and then
It pushes you back.
yes, pushes you away.
But you know, another
So.
way is cartooning. That the grotesque, and I'm hopeful that we'll see that the definition, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, of grotesque is sort of changing. But these people are somewhat grotesque.
Yes. This is James Gilray, and I've got to say, it's a personal favorite. This is the man who's standing on the left side, who's the only one who seems not to be reacting, is Dr. Jenner, who developed the smallpox vaccine.
Yes, and see, yeah, okay.
Yes, and so this
But
is.
he's giving a smallpox inoculation. to
Yes,
this.
and you could see everyone who's already had one because they are sprouting cows everywhere. They're sprouting horns. Cows are coming out of pockets.
I love it.
Udders are forming in various untoward places.
Well, and we need to stop a minute and
Yes.
explain that
Yes.
that the first inoculations against smallpox were taken from the pustules of
That's right.
milkmaids
That's
who
right.
had cowpox.
That's right.
So they got it in a much less virulent form.
That's right.
From milking cows. So
Right.
so
it's
that's
the
why
whole
the
idea of
cows are sprouting.
vaccination.
We need to
Right.
be
to
clear where those cows
explain-
came from. Yes.
That's right. Very good point. So, so Gilray is a typical caricature. It exaggerates and distorts things in order to show his opinion about it, but also to, in many ways, he's showing what people are afraid of. This idea, I mean, when you really think about it, it's like mixing species. You're putting some cow and you're putting a disease into me.
But they had
So-
to walk through the grotto too.
Yes, that's right. So he's really trying to, in many ways, through humor, which is a big part of the grotesque, wit and humor reveal what some of the fears
Well, you know,
were.
Picasso said that painting is just another way of keeping a diary.
Yes,
And
especially for him.
Yeah, and I think the cartoon illustrates that really well
That's right.
because it makes a pretty good social comment. You know, the grotesque, I think, too, it would be fair to say, often represents a state of change. And I think as we move through the centuries, Salvador Dali comes into play.
Yes.
And he is definitely different,
Right.
one might say.
Right.
And that to me goes back to the really grotesque.
Yes.
It kind of skips back a couple of
Right.
generations.
Yeah, the horrible and horrifying has long been a part of the grotesque. Part of the purpose of my book was to say, yes, that's true, but it has these other major strands that are humorous, that are improvisational, and so on. Dali, this particular work is part of the title is Premonition of Civil War, and this was really in response to the development of the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
And another work that's well known related to that is Guernica, Picasso's Guernica.
Picasso is also a very important person in this grotesque business.
Right, yeah, Picasso is almost totally grotesque all the time. You know, all these major strands he plays with.
He didn't start out that way, though.
That's right, early on he has.
But you know, if we move from Dali to another person, Frida Kahlo, and Frida Kahlo, here's her self-portrait, and this is her lover, Diego de Rivera, in her forehead, and she says, this is her comment, she said, "I leave you my portrait so that you will have my presence all the days and nights that I am away from you." So she had a purpose, and it is somewhat grotesque, but not...
Well, it's combinatory. You have his face, and she really, in this work and many of her other works, she really uses the grotesque in a way that is new in the modern tradition. And
but it changes. See, that's the whole point, that grotesque, as we move through those centuries, changes.
Right, it does.
Yeah.
It does. And sometimes things that used to be grotesque, as culture evolves, are really no longer.
We get used to it.
We get used to it, or we understand it more. You know, groups of people are sometimes described as, you know, there were descriptions of distant peoples and voyage accounts that, you know, people had big eyes in the middle of their torsos or something. It was just, you know, things that we don't understand.
A little different.
We make monstrous.
Yes. But then we got to go to the Dadaists.
Yes.
And we talk about Otto Dix. And, you know, that's a little different too, but we're now talking in the 40s, so we're 1940s. So we're talking about war here.
Yes.
Is this World
This
War
is World
One?
War One,
This is World War
which
One.
he was
so this
in.
is
He was in the
1914 to 1918,
That's
right around in there.
And then he comes out of that. Dada is a movement that explodes after World War I, and sort of the outrage at what that war had done. And
well, and we all know that gas in the trenches killed millions. 9 million people died in World War I.
That's right. And he did a whole series of prints called Der Krieg, or the War, where he explores these kinds of things. And the other image, which is, I think, even more powerful, the one the war veterans playing cards.
Yes, there are 3 gentlemen.
That one, yes, and each one of them, they are all kind of jerry-rigged together. They are all mutilated, which was very, very common. But what's interesting about this is that he presents this as caricature. So when you think about showing these veterans who had suffered and died for their country, shown as caricatures and with these kind of crazy Rube Goldberg kind of contraptions. You know, if you put all these men together, they might make one whole figure.
He had to fix it so people would look at it.
Right.
Yes.
I think one reason was that if he made it caricatured and kind of it's a very dark humor, people will at least look at it in a way they would not look at the actual people who were on the streets. But it's also, like many good grotesque, is fusing the comedy, horror, all at the same time, and provoking questions. You know, why did you do this?
Well, you know, William Faulkner said something interesting. He said, the aim of every artist is to arrest motion, which is life, by artificial means and hold it fixed so that 100 years later, when a stranger looks at it, it moves again, since it is life. Yeah. And I think that illustrates these 3 gentlemen, that 100 years later, it is still life. Yes. You said, I'm going to quote you again, Princess. You said you feel that abstraction has dominated the modernist narrative. So what is the role of the grotesque in that statement?
Well, I think in histories of modern art, if you think abstraction is the great achievement, and it's certainly a great achievement, then you only look at certain artists that lead up to that. But if you look at any given period in modern art, Cubism, Expressionism, Surrealism, you'll see that the grotesque is right there just as dominant. And I think in our own time, now that we have a different view of the 20th century and past centuries, we are somehow revolving around to the point now that the grotesque is more obvious to us. Maybe because we live in a time where there are a lot more contradictions. You know, there's not just one point of view or one authoritative voice. They're contradictory ones, and like Ruskin said, the viewer has to, or the reader, the participant has to choose. So I think the grotesque is something that makes a lot of sense to people now. I think there's a lot of interest in it.
It's not a static word.
No, it's not.
I found an interesting comment. It said, art is the desire of a man to express himself, to record the reactions of his personality to the world in which he lives. And I think that's really what the grotesque does. It records the reactions, because the eye of the artist is the eye of the world, I think. And I think that, so what are you going to do next? Going to write another book?
Yes, but I think I'm going to do some shorter articles. These books are, you know,
kind of a
6,
pain.
7 years. Well, I love doing it, but it's a 6, 7 year
Yes.
project.
Yes.
And that's not counting all the publication process and so on. But yeah, I have several interests. There are a number of African diaspora artists I'm interested in who use the grotesque. So, you know, the more you learn about it, it's just keeps opening up.
Kind of snowballs on you,
Yes, it
Frances.
does. Yes, it does. I don't think I'll ever escape.
No. So, you know, well,
So-
the good part about that is that you have a lifetime job.
Yes.
So I think
Let's
that's
hope.
wonderful. You have chosen a field that is full of interest, and that the people who have contributed to art and the history of art really have contributed to the culture and continue to contribute. I mean, Picasso is still contributing to
Yes.
the culture, even though he's been dead a number of years.
Right. Yeah. And we're
So-
still realizing and understanding more things about him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think, as I say thank you to Frances
welcome.
Connelly, who is a professor of art history at the University of Missouri at Kansas City, I would quote Isaac Bashevis Singer, and he says, "Every creator painfully experiences the chasm between his inner vision and its ultimate expression." And to me, that summarizes what we're talking about as the grotesque in Western art and culture has changed over the years, so that inner vision changes as well. Thank you so much. We're just delighted to have you visit with us as we meet our neighbors and remind all of us that, after all, we live in a wonderful community. I'm Mary Davidson, and I'll see you again very soon.